Helo a chroeso i gynhadledd ddigidol Engage for Success Cymru 2020. Bydd ein gynhadledd yn canolbwyntio ar ymgysylltu â gweithwyr a bydd ni'n canolbwyntio ar bob un o'r 4 galluogwr ymgysylltu â gweithwyr drwy lens y 7 nod llesiant o fewn y ddeddf llesiant cenedlaethau'r dyfodol yng Nghymru. Hello and welcome to Engage for Success Wales's Digital Conference 2020. Our conference will focus on employee engagement and we'll be shining a light on each of the 4 enablers of employee engagement through the lens of the 7 well-being goals of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act in Wales. This year, we are delighted to be bringing this to you in association with Business News Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn. In 2009, the MacLeod report was published. Its authors, David MacLeod and Nita Clark, were commissioned to conduct research into high-performing organisations across all sectors. And to elicit what these high-performing organisations had in common, their research found that there were 4 common themes. Firstly, they had visible, empowering leadership which provided a strong, strategic narrative about the organisation, where it had come from and where it was going. Secondly, each organisation had engaging managers who focused on their people, who coached and stretched them to reach their potential, and who treated each person as an individual. Thirdly, there was a strong employee voice throughout the organisations. Employees were seen as central to the solution, to be involved, listened to, and invited to contribute their experience, expertise, and ideas. Finally, they had organisational integrity, meaning that the values on the wall were genuinely reflected in day-to-day behaviours. There was no say-do gap, promises made were promises kept, or an explanation was given as to why not. These 4 common themes of strategic narrative, engaging managers, employee voice, and organisational integrity were defined as the 4 enablers of engagement. But why does employee engagement matter? It matters because there is a direct correlation between levels of employee engagement and levels of productivity, revenue growth and net profit, employee turnover, customer satisfaction, innovation, efficiency, and even health and safety. The analysis of evidence shows only around 1/3 of UK employees say they are actively engaged. 20 million workers are not delivering their full capability or realising their potential at work. 64% of people say they have more to offer in skills and talents than they are currently being asked to contribute at work. There is no doubt that 2020 has been economically challenging, with a slump in GDP and a huge increase in unemployment. This area of employee engagement is something within our influence to change, something that can assist in business growth at a time when so many businesses are under huge pressures. On behalf of Engage for Success Wales, may I thank our sponsors for this session, CIPD Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Finally, our conference is a not-for-profit venture. All attendance is free and profits will be donated to our partner charity, Daring to Dream. Donations can be made via www.daringtodream.wales and will help support the emotional health and well-being of patients in Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Hello, and a warm welcome to you, whether you're watching live or you're watching on demand. You join us for a fascinating, I'm sure, and quite rich conversation about equality and diversity of voice within organisations and the importance of it. But before we get into the meat of that conversation, I'd like to introduce you to the people that will be contributing to it today. So if I could ask you to make an introduction, if I start with you, Julian.
Hi, my name's Julian John. I'm the Managing Director at Delcian. We're a people and development consultancy where our main focus is on diversity and inclusion within organisations.
Fantastic. And Lynn?
Hi, I'm Linda Bullerman. I'm the Cardiff leader for the BYP Network, which is the Black Young Professionals Network. It's a network of Black professionals, and we work with organisations to help them to recruit more Black talent, but also support professionals throughout their career journey as they move through the scales.
Wonderful. And finally, Karen.
Hello everyone, I'm Karen Davis, the founder and chief exec of Purple Shoots, which is a charity that funds small businesses, helps people get businesses off the ground, usually people who have been turned down by other lenders, so the people very small businesses and helping them get started.
Thank you. And I'm David D'Souza, I'm Membership Director at the CIPD, with a professional body for HR and people development, so a keen interest in this subject. If you go back to 2015, Wales was the first country in the world, and indeed the only country in the world, to legislate for future generations and to try and protect and indeed improve the quality of the future for them. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act came in, and the introduction of a role, Commissioner of the Future Generations, which is now held by Sophie Howe. If you think about it, it's an incredibly progressive move, and one that's firmly focused on understanding that the tomorrow that we have can definitely be better than the today that we have. And I realise it's been a tough year for everyone listening to this, both in terms of health outcomes, and hopefully we've turned the corner with news of some vaccines, and I'm not sure that it's a coincidence, but the Welsh rugby team finally won at the weekend as well. So two shots of good news at the same time. But the focus of that act and the focus of some of the conversation we have today, but also a really important focus for business and the people that work in it, is about trying to create a thriving economy. And within that, it's provision of jobs, reduction of inequality, increasing diversity and promoting inclusion, a theme that's been consistent throughout this year in terms of being challenging against a really difficult economic backdrop, improving health and lifelong learning, building resilience of people and organisations, and finally creating thriving communities, but doing all of those things in a cleaner and greener way. Now, there's nothing there that you wouldn't want to happen. None of those things are easy to access or deliver in isolation, but they're all critically important and something that you would want to build for future generations, and indeed deliver as much as we can within this. So without further ado, on my part, we'll be moving into this conversation about how more equal and diverse workforces increase the richness and creativity that sit within them. And so we come to our first question. And I'm going to come to you, if it's okay, Karen, for the first question, which is, in what way do you think the pandemic has shone a light on inequality and lack of diversity in the workplace?
That's a big question, and there's a sort of a macro answer to that as well as a micro answer, maybe. I think one of the main things it's done is expose the way that we value people in workplaces, and sort of underline the fact that we don't value, we pay badly the people who are who have actually proved to be essential. So, you know, as examples, you know, lorry drivers, shelf stackers, all the people that we really needed in the pandemic, and who have been viewed as relatively insignificant before. I think I'm hoping that has changed people's outlook on who's worth what in the workplace, and shown that actually everybody is pretty vital, whatever role they play. And I think in the work in larger organisations where people have been able to work at home, I think it's also exposed the other big issue, which it links into this, which is around employers' ability to trust their employees. So, you know, I've heard lots of different examples of people who have been able to work at home without any problem, and those who haven't, because their employers are just not quite sure they can trust them to get on with what they're supposed to be doing. And so, and I think that links into sort of listening to employees too, and trusting them. So those are sort of the bigger things that have been exposed, I think, with this pandemic.
Really interesting, really, and that trust point is really important in terms of communication and involvement. Lynn, your thoughts on that?
I echo kind of a lot of what Karen said. I think one of the things I've noticed is that it's really brought, I guess, as we say in HR, the human back into organizations and leaders. It's become a lot harder with everything having slowed down to ignore global issues. And, you know, that's part of really what accelerated the Black Lives Matter movement, along with the fact that we were seeing that people from sort of Black and Asian and other minority ethnic groups were more disproportionately affected by COVID. I think it's broken down a communication barrier People feel more comfortable being able to talk about issues or how they feel that they've been held back, whether that's socioeconomically, whether that's through racism, and it's created a situation for organizations where they feel that they need to respond and find a way to tackle that. So it really has changed things massively, and I think it's also highlighted, who's privileged and who isn't in many different areas, and created a space for us to change that.
And there was, just digging into that a little bit more, there was obviously a huge focus on Black Lives Matters as a movement in the summer. Do you think that spotlight remains, or do you think the media attention has moved elsewhere and shifted elsewhere, and organisations need to stay focused?
I think it's still prevalent in everyone's minds, but I do think that the focus has shifted. I think especially, with the pandemic having lasted much longer than people expected, and with the new vaccines, I think it has moved. But I think, particularly diversity is still a core issue for a lot of people, and I do think that we need to stay on it and continue pushing it forward and tackling the inequalities that exist.
Fantastic. And Julian?
I think there's two sides to it. I think we've heard today that it's predicted that unemployment is going to reach 2.6 million, unfortunately, on the basis of the pandemic. And what we can see within that is that if you look at protected characteristics, there's going to be certain groups which will be the hardest hit. And that's going to be around age at both ends of the spectrum. It's going to be around race. It's going to be around females, and it's going to be down disability. And what that highlights is that because where we see in organizations where diversity may sit at entry level, lower level, but what we haven't got is diversity integrated through an entire breadth of the organization, whether that be through recruitment, whether that be through succession planning. So I think that's a key learning to take forward. However, on the other side of the spectrum, we know more diverse organizations are more creative, more adept at problem solving. So I think what you'll see on the back of when we start looking at what's happened through what organizations have done through the pandemic, that more diverse organizations have thrived on the basis that they have been more creative around the problem solving and some of the issues that are faced.
And again, same question to you, I suppose. There have been patches where people have focused on different aspects of diversity or different groups being impacted in different way. But do you think there's been enough of a spotlight throughout kind of the crisis on the different impacts it's had on different groups?
My view around diversity and inclusion is about creating a sense of belonging and treating people as individuals. And we need to focus on the needs of specific groups, but we also need to be able to treat everyone as an individual within that organisation. So the spotlights are absolutely needed, but we also need an overarching approach to diversity and inclusion to meet individual needs.
Great. So I'm going to come to you first on this one, if it's okay, Lynn. What kind of opportunities now exist within businesses and organisations to promote a more equal Wales? So if we look at Wales and we look at the opportunity there, what would you describe as the key opportunities that we can take from this point going forward?
I think one of the biggest ones is obviously with remote working at the minute. I think it's really increased the possibility of getting talent, across Wales, and predominantly there's almost this perception that everything kind of sits in Cardiff because it's the capital, and I think a lot of people are looking to move out. So a lot of people are looking to move more into North Wales, Mid Wales, and into smaller remote villages, and there really is an opportunity here for organisations to grab onto talent and help retain that. And also I feel like a lot of people are also moving out of places like Bristol and London and moving into Cardiff or other places in Wales. So there's a huge opportunity there to get talent. And again, when they're looking at diversity, I think there's a huge opportunity to get talent in, not necessarily just at entry level, but also mid-level and senior level. There's also a huge opportunity for, I believe, development and for organizations to really look at what they can change as a result of this pandemic and do it now while everyone is, everyone doesn't feel stuck to a certain position or a certain location.
So for you, is there an element of that remote working allows for kind of geographical leveling up? So
yes.
Different regions. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can, I was having a conversation earlier this morning about lots of hubs being created and finances being poured into, central locations like Cardiff, but not so much into remote areas and places where transport links aren't as great. So there could be an opportunity as more people move out to develop those areas as well.
Absolutely, infrastructure need for any of the things that you've kind of described there. Karen, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've been seeing in our world of helping create small businesses, a big upsurge in that potential, and I think there's a much more openness to the local. People want to shop local, they want to engage with local businesses, so there's much more opportunity right across Wales for local businesses, for smaller ones to develop and to grow rather than relying on the very big ones. And I think that could be a great deal more inclusive, because small local businesses, a lot of the businesses we fund are women led, because if you've got your own business, you can work that around your caring responsibilities or whatever else there is. And there's a lot more opportunity to be connected locally. So I think there's great potential for the local businesses to develop more, and for the small scale to be actually what creates the economic recovery for us. I mean, on a bigger scale, I think there are other opportunities that were always there, and it's just whether people are willing to seize them now. You know, on the negative, it's whether the larger businesses will be afraid to take risks with people because they're afraid of the future. But I think the opportunity for small is out there, definitely.
And just digging into that bit a little bit more, when you say afraid to take risks with people, do you mean people with less typical backgrounds, or the kind of, because there are, for large organisations, quite often historically they've recruited a type. Is it that they'll be less likely to recruit outside, I guess, those stereotypes?
I mean, I think they definitely need to do that, to recruit outside that stereotype. I think it's a risk around taking on an unusual person, locally, but I think it's also around listening to different ideas. I think because a lot of people have engaged much more locally, much more online, there's a lot of good ideas out there about how to do things better. And I think the larger organisations need to be prepared to listen to those thoughts from people who they might have thought were insignificant. We've seen such a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and adaptiveness and flexibility amongst the small businesses that we've supported, and those are people that are largely, or have been historically, written off as no hopers by everyone else, and yet they're the ones that have created something really good. And I think even in a large organisation there are people like that with those entrepreneurial ideas and skills that would enrich a larger business, but they're not generally listened to, or haven't been up till now.
I think it's a really interesting point that organisations, I suppose, you might describe as taking a risk. Really, it's having a poor track record in inclusion, isn't it? And we're talking today about embracing creativity, embracing diversity of thought and backgrounds. And actually, it's just that organisations haven't done well enough on that to reap the benefits from it. Julian, I know you'll have some thoughts on the opportunities that can be taken.
What Karen and Lynn said, just to pick up on the point that Lynn was making, I think that the key opportunity sits around flexibility. In regards to working practices, the dreaded thought of someone working from home is now the day role as such, but there's also flexibility in regards to some of the policies and processes in place. I remember one of the last training pieces we did before going into lockdown with organisations was discussing some of the barriers to sit around recruitment processes with an organisation which then had to go into a recruitment piece, and all those barriers will suddenly be removed to allow us to be more flexible to recruit people. So what I wouldn't like to see is take some that we lose some of the key learnings through all of this and some of the flexibility that we have, and that then sort of springs back into some of the older practices. I think flexibility is key for organisations across Wales to embrace.
And just bring that to life for people a bit more. So there's flexibility, as we're talking about, I guess, geographically, but I know flexibility is a lot more than just, where you set up in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. And a couple of things link around that, whether it be accessibility, whether it be flexible working times, if they're appropriate. One of the things that this whole situation has brought in is that we are now in people's homes. We now understand that people do have childcare responsibilities. We do know that once we shut the front door, that's not the end of it, that there's more flexibility to allow people to work in a much more productive manner in a different situation, as opposed to the traditional, you have to be in your office at 9 o'clock. But also that then opens to a completely new talent pool, including disability, care and niche, whatever it may be. So there's huge opportunities. And I think on the longer piece that we can actually attract organisations into Wales on the basis of having a more flexible infrastructure that sits around there and better working practices, because more organisations are undertaking it.
Absolutely. I'm going to start with you for this one, Julian, as well. So double helpings for you, coming straight to you. Has the rapid change in working practices over 2020, because we started in one place very rapidly organisations had to make a shift. Has that helped ensure that people are seen not as a problem to be solved, but as central to the solutions that need to be created? Has it created a different view of value of people in organisations and what they can deliver?
Yeah, no, I think it has. And I think we need to question where we see people as problems or to be solved within organizations. But what we have got is we've now empowered a huge amount of people. But what we've also done is we've given a huge amount of trust in individuals. Again, just from this piece of working from home. And we need to understand that all the worst nightmares of line managers actually saying they're not in my line of sight, so therefore someone can't be doing their role effectively, is just gone. So we need to keep on building on that trust, on that empowerment of individuals. One of the things that we've been discussing with organizations, what happens if you revert back to some of the old practices where you take that empowerment away from people, when there is that extra element of that trust not being there. So no, I think there are some really good opportunities that sit within this. And I think, as I mentioned before, we've just got to keep learning from them, because there's some, certainly within any period of extremely rapid change, there'll always be learnings to be taken away from it. So we need to make sure that we take these learnings and keep on expanding on them.
And do you think, because it was probably, for the last half century, that really simple phrase, employees are an organisation's greatest asset, was never really seen through. Do you think we're closer to that now, where organisations are thinking we really need to look after our people because that will make a difference to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we just look at employee engagement, and if we just look at the four enablers of what we do with regards to having a strategic narrative, having organizational integrity, but just from a line manager's perspective, the conversation I've been having is, what can I do to support my people in this time? Have these conversations we've never had with individuals. We may have worked alongside them for a number of years. That extra element of kindness, caring, understanding, and empathy. I think if we can take that forward, that will be one of the greatest things that we can take from this.
And Lynn, what about you? Have you seen that shift?
Yes and no. I feel like, organizations have made that shift, but the ones that have been able to make it and do it in a good way are really those that have had the luxury that have sort of rode the wave kind of pretty well and haven't been impacted too hard financially, or in some cases they've had a boost this year. But I feel like for a lot of other organizations, they're almost adding an added pressure on employees, where it's, they recognize they need their employees to survive, but maybe because of panic, there's an added pressure on employees to keep the business going, particularly for, if you look at businesses in retail or those that, are still in danger at the minute. I don't think that's having a positive impact on their employees. And as we know, a lot of people are suffering with sort of burnout at the minute, and, managers themselves are burnt out, leaders are burnt out. How can they, be able to support their employees? So it's yes and no. I think it's a mixed bag depending on where that organization is right now, throughout this year. But everyone's definitely understanding the importance of their employees. It's just how much pressure they're adding to them right now that I think is the key point.
And I think what you're suggesting, and tell me if it's not, is that you believe that most organizations recognize that they do need to care and they do need to support, but some aren't in a position where actually they can do that.
Yes.
Or where they're prioritizing other things that might be understandable during a crisis.
Yes, absolutely. And that ties in with what Karen was saying about trust. Some employees have made some organizations have made a complete transformation in that trust process, of where at the beginning there probably was a lack of trust, and now that everyone's been doing it for a while and there's probably more streamlined processes, there is more trust. But in some organizations that's not possible. And yeah, it's looking at how do we change that.
And Karen, your thoughts on that?
I think there's an underlying issue that could sort of derail the positive changes that we're beginning to see, and I think that's to do with the way that our corporate world is organised. At the moment, companies, that they need capital, they need money to run, they need people, they need their location, the environment they operate in. But at the moment, the only people who make a decision on what happens are the ones who own the money. And so the environment around the company and the people who are in it just still take a second role in all the big decisions. And I think that needs to change before we can see really big differences. You know, we need to sort of place. I think we need some sort of legislative change that makes companies consider other things other than their responsibility to make a profit for shareholders. I'm talking about the private sector now, but I think that driver to make profit is what will overrule any of the good stuff that might come out of this, which kind of links in with what Lynn was saying about it, depending on where a company is. You know, if they have the luxury, if they're okay, then they can implement some of this good stuff. If they're not, the profit motive is paramount. They've got to, and so that might derail it. So I do think that we need to press for some sort of more fundamental change that will make sure that all these positive things that are beginning to happen are not lost.
It's a really, really interesting point around the motives driving it. So I know that probably most of the people having a chat today, having spoken to you earlier and seen your kind of bios, the belief would be that actually you get that success through people. But I think what I'm hearing from you, Karen, possibly even more so than Lynn, is that you still see organisations and hear of organisations that put profit first and don't recognise that the pathway to that is through treating people well.
Yeah.
And we see, and you know, we need to be honest. I think at times there are organisations that succeed despite their people practices, and we've got a world where that, you know, is unable to be true. But actually, a clear pathway to success is doing it through people and supporting people. And if this can be a shift to that, that can only be a good thing. So, if the aspiration is to be more inclusive, have a more diverse workforce, representative workforce, and to give people genuine voice and influence within it, if that's the recipe for success, then Lynn, coming to you first on this one, what additional support and skills do leaders need to do that? So you talked about them being burnt out, but actually if they weren't burnt out, when we get to, you know, something on the far side of this, what skills do you think leaders need to bring out the best in people?
I think compassionate leadership, you know, leaning into that a bit more, and, you know, authenticity. If this year has shown us anything, it's that it's okay to be who we are, and it's okay to welcome people into our own personal spaces. So I think compassionate leadership and being able to take a compassionate approach to understanding the different issues that people have within their workplace. I also think that leaders need to be braver in tackling issues. You know, if we look at racism, for example, I think that leaders and organizations need to be braver at tackling that, and taking a stance knowing that there may be backlash, so long as they know that they're doing the right thing. I think a lot of organizations are sitting on the fence on a lot of issues, and we can't really move forward unless, you know, organizations really, leaders especially, really just take that stance and support. So many organizations were criticized for not doing that over in the summer when they needed to on time. So it's, I think bravery and compassionate leadership are probably the top two, I think, but also, you know, continuing to look at how they can give back. And in what ways, whether that's, you know, being able to teach, or whether that's investing financially into different networks and resources. It's really just looking at what can they do as an individual and as an organization to support those that need it most.
Why do you think, and Karen and Julian, I'll come to you on that original question in a second, but why do you think organisations are so reticent to take a stand on issues, or to speak clearly, I suppose, about what they believe?
Blame culture, you know, I think it's, especially in today's world, it's so easy to be blamed for saying the wrong thing, even if you didn't mean to. You know, we're seeing that more and more. So I think organizations are hesitant because nobody wants, you know, negative press and negative media on their organization as saying the wrong thing, especially on polarizing issues, you know, like racism and things like that. But I think organizations should just, the way to lead and the way to change things is by doing that. You know, Sainsbury's are a great example recently in the way that they've just taken a stand and they're saying, we know that this is right, and that will encourage more organizations to do the same.
And I think at some point you send a message by not saying anything, and I think we saw that during the summer. and we'll see that increasingly, that people expect values to be, front and center for organizations, and then for them to live up to them as well. Karen, for you, what's the leadership gap? What are the skills? What's the support that's needed to get us to a place where actually they're not, as Julian says, mistrusting, just trying to micromanage people, but actually leading people and getting the best out of them?
I think leaders need some evidence that from companies where it's working, that actually trusting people, taking people is not just it's not, or being diverse, all these things is not just a nice to have, but it actually is good for the company. I think, people think, oh, I'll employ a disabled person, because I have to. And actually that disabled person is probably totally fantastic at something and has a lot to contribute. And it's not just a nice to have, it's because it's a person, a valuable person. I mean, we've seen in some of our online stuff, people learning from each other who you never think would learn from each other, where we've got different groups of people together. And you realise the value that everybody brings, and I think some organisations need convincing of that. I think they think, they'll be more inclusive if they have to be, but they don't actually realise that it's the best thing to do. And so that I think we need an education somehow, especially around small businesses who maybe have a few staff but don't have much time, and they need to see too that they'll actually gain from being inclusive. And I think that's what's missing. There's a sort of a negative thing about, well, we must be inclusive, I suppose, sort of attitude. And actually it's the opposite. They should be, because the ones that are inclusive are more successful.
And do you think, because it's a really interesting point around education, and I know that some people watching will be thinking, but the evidence is out there, we've known it for years, these aren't new problems, inequality of pay around race, inequality of pay around, the gender pay gap. These aren't things that we haven't been aware of. Is it an education issue, or is it the wrong people in the wrong roles? What do you think's at the heart of it? So you talked about a really interesting dynamic between, is it more prevalent in SMEs because it seems more of a challenge? But these challenges are systemic across so many countries across the world, not just Wales. So is it an education piece, and what would it look like if it was?
I think it's an education piece in terms of what's to be gained from doing it. I think everybody knows that there is a gender pay gap and that there are these things are out there. But I don't think we say enough about the positives of actually addressing it. And so we need to tell stories of the companies that have addressed it and have done great things as a result. I mean, if I'm allowed to name Timpson as an example, they take on all sorts. They take on all sorts of risky people. They're a very successful company. They've got lots of employee engagement. They do all that stuff, and they're still a profitable company. And so, but there are others like them, and I think those examples need to be made. Maybe we should make more of them so that people know. Because I think there is an element of not understanding the positives of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, those risky people are just missed opportunities for other employers, aren't they? I think it's a matter of framing. So, Julian, from your point of view, what support and skills are needed to develop this, more mature, progressive economy that's genuinely making the most of people and the talent that it has?
I think just to pick up from the conversation, that it's about education, it's about knowledge. There's a couple of things that sit within that. There's the knowledge of leadership to understand the power of a diverse organisation and the power of inclusion, how it touches every aspect of that organisation and the benefits across the board. But there's also having the knowledge that sits around patriarchy, privilege, the social model of disability, and an empathy to understand that these things do exist and the barriers that they cause within an organisation, because I don't think that's as widespread as it should be at a leadership level. And then I think one of the key things to really understand is that as a leader within the organisation, you want authenticity. You want able to be people to come into an organisation and be authentic and feel they're represented within that organisation, and a focus on that. And again, link back to understanding what the benefits are across the organisation. Are some real key points to give to leaders to try and take forward.
So could you bring to life for people kind of watching? There's been a lot of talk, I guess, over recent years about authentic leadership and authenticity in the workplace and bringing your whole self to work. Obviously, there are limits to that, I suppose, in terms of what you want from people, in terms of appropriateness of behaviour and culture. But if you were to try and sell to an employer now the importance of doing it, so use this as an educational platform, what would you be saying to people?
Well, if you look at the talent pool you want to bring into your organization and the competencies, behaviors, whether you attribute to your values, you want to bring that person in for what they can offer. What you don't want to do is bring someone into an organization who then feels they have to conform into some way for that organization. And it is understanding that these are some real issues to individuals who come into an organization who feel that they're not represented, they can't be themselves within work because the strategic narrative that sits within that organization has barriers to doing that. So it's very key to say that to get again to link back to engagement. If we want to allow people to operate at their highest levels within an organization, we should have and create that environment to allow them to be themselves within it as well.
Fantastic, thank you, really helpful. So next one's a really big, meaty question. Not that the ones up to this point haven't been, but I think we're going up a gear. Is creating a more equal Wales in the workplace just wishful thinking? So given everything that's going on, but also given how long some of the problems that we're talking about have existed, is it just wishful thinking, or is it something that could really happen? Julian, if I come to you first on this one.
Do you know, I really hope not, for the simple reason that when I set up the business, we set the social goal of to help make Wales the leading nation for inclusion in the workplace. So if it isn't, I've been wasting my time for the last 5 years, and every time I get out of bed in the morning, I'm sort of setting myself up to failure. But I set that goal not as an aspirational piece because I felt it looked good on the top of a letterheading or anything, because I feel it is absolutely obtainable. I believe we've got the environment. I also believe that we've got the engagement in Wales to allow these things to happen. I always remember an interesting conversation I had is that, well, you're from Wales, so the 6 degrees of separation that happens elsewhere in the world are only 2 in Wales because the majority of people are connected in some way, and we've got this acute ability to make things happen. And I think we need to embrace that. We also need to embrace the diversity that we have across Wales, and we need to harness all that enthusiasm. And if we just look at the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, I think that's a clear engagement and direction to say that we've set our stall out and we just need to live up to those expectations. So yes, no, it's a fundamental yes for me.
Fantastic. And you're absolutely right. For a nation to very straightforwardly say, we care about generations to come, we're going to try and design things that support that, is a really powerful statement in and of itself. First time I'd heard the thing about 2 degrees of separation. It's a nice way of thinking about it, isn't it? Having bumped into far too many cousins in Pembrokeshire by accident in public houses. Lynn, coming to you next on that, is it just wishful thinking? And if not, I'm gonna say to you, what sort of timescales are we looking at? Do we go back before we go forward because of the pandemic, or is this the kind of pivotal moment where things start changing?
I think it is very possible. Otherwise, this whole year has been about listening. And, if we don't take action, then I really don't see the point. I think there's so many opportunities right now to change things. And I think that it is very possible to have a more equal Wales. And I feel like we're already on that ladder anyway. It's just about, organizations continue to propel that and continue to take steps forward once we enter into 2021 and 2022. I don't think COVID will necessarily push us a step back, provided things don't get worse. I feel like if things continue to improve at the rate that we think that they will, then I think it will only help it, because that is part of the reason why diversity and inclusion has had such a spotlight this year anyway. So I'd like to hope that that's what could happen. And I think in terms of actually seeing that in effect, I think within the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I would love it to be 5 or even less than that where possible, but I think it will take a bit of time. And also I think, once we have the results of the next consensus as well, that might propel things a little quicker as well. So we'll wait to see what happens, but I think it definitely is possible. And it makes me happy to think that that there is progress right now.
Thank you. So there's a challenge for everyone watching, which is to try and make it closer to those smaller numbers than the bigger ones, and to try and keep Lynn happy with that sense of progress. And Karen, what are your thoughts? Is it a pipe dream, or is it something that's very reachable?
I think we can't afford for it to be a pipe dream. I think we can't go on leaving people behind, leaving people out. because I think if nothing else, that this pandemic has shown us that we need each other and we need everybody together. And I think that's an important thing to sort of build on. And what Julian was saying about the 2 degrees of separation, I think that's one of Wales's big strengths. We are we are very supportive of each other, and it's quite a close community of 3 million people, but it is quite a close knit in a way, and I think that's quite a strength that we can build on. And I suppose that I think everybody can do something. I think that's a message that we all should take away, that we should all be working towards is doing what we can wherever we can to make sure that it does happen, because I think we must make sure it happens. But there is political will there, which is a good start.
And in the spaces that you work in, with the organisations that you kind of work with and support and see, are you seeing that change? Are you feeling more confident?
Yes, I mean, certainly I think they are more confident. I think they can see more opportunity now, not less, because of the I suppose the shrinking of the world a little bit, because we're more reliant on what's immediately around us, and I think they see that as a good opportunity to build from.
That's good to hear. Positive note. So you've all listened to each other, hopefully. In terms of what you're going to do with the people that you come into contact with, the people that you support, what has this conversation encouraged you to do differently tomorrow? So having listened to kind of at least 2 inspiring speakers each, what are you going to do differently tomorrow? Lynn, if I come to you first.
I think it's just more of a reminder that I think we need to balance the scales a bit more and create safer spaces. So I think it's just a reminder for me personally, with organizations that I kind of speak to, but also with individuals within my network, just reaching out and creating safe space to have these conversations, and encourage leaders to sort of take more of a braver stance. So I think it's more of a reminder to just stay connected and to have more of these conversations as someone who can bring up certain things.
And have you got any tips for anyone watching? If they wanted to do the same thing tomorrow and set out and do things a bit differently, what would be your kind of best advice to do that?
I always like to say it just starts with conversation, reaching out and speaking to people on a one-on-one level, and trying to take a different approach, avoiding the small talk and trying to get to, the deeper issues, but also asking for advice, whether that's on a personal level or professionally, just reaching out and having those conversations. And one thing I'm trying to do is create more peer conversations, between leaders from different organizations or people that lead, networks within different organizations, to actually share practice and talk to each other, to learn from each other, and to also be able to do things a little bit differently than they would have done if they just focus on their internal organization and their employees. And
that's a great action for anyone watching. And to come back to Karen and Julian's point around the strength of community and connection, is for people, if they are struggling or they want to do things better, to reach out into the community, to reach out to other organizations, and to do it together rather than trying to have to solve it on your own. So hugely important that you don't, if you feel uncomfortable or you don't know what to do next, go ask, but do find a way to do something. Really important point. And Karen, for you, what's kind of the key takeaway and the thing that you're inspired to do differently?
I think a lot of it's around, similar to Lynn, it's around building the network of allies. Because I think if we want to create real change, we need to stand up with or link up with the people who also want to do the same thing. It's easy when you're in your own little world to feel that it's just you fighting for something, and actually what we all want to see is very similar. So I think the idea of standing together and trying to bring about change together is a good one. So I'm too good at doing everything myself, and not good enough at linking up with other people and realizing that there are other people out there trying to do the same thing. So. And I think I would encourage the people that we support to do that as well. We do encourage that, but maybe we're always looking for better ways of doing it, because it doesn't always happen. And I think that
it doesn't happen as much as it should. And we talked about everyone doing it together. if it's about a better future. It's a team effort, absolutely. Julian, what about for you?
Just want to pick up on what both Karen and Lynn said. For me, it's about collaboration, the power of like-minded individuals. We've all got the set objectives, so if we can collaborate, we can get there a lot quicker. And just to pick up from what Lynn said, it's about conversations and reaching out. We want to get to the point where you keep talking about it, so you don't have to talk about it anymore. And I think that's key. Again, when we talk about education, about knowledge, just keep on having these conversations. The biggest concern I think all of us would have is that we move back from the diversity and inclusion agenda on the basis that we've got other things to do. And I think we just keep the momentum going. So certainly my action will be to keep reaching out to people.
Yeah, and the focus of these conversations has been about engaging leadership, about conversations, about people coming together, about honesty, and all the things that are represented there. And we talked, at the very start about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the focus of that. And there are so many laudable goals that sit within that. Organisations have got a part to play, but actually it's the individuals within those, and then the groups of individuals and teams within those that make the biggest difference. So there's nothing left for me to say, except thank you so much to Julian and Karen and Lynn for their contribution today. It's an engaging leadership series, but they couldn't have been more engaging or open and helpful with their comments. So thank you very much for joining today. Thank you to everyone who's been listening or watching. And we really hope that you've enjoyed it and found the best of it. But most importantly, go out and do something different. Because I think you've heard today about the opportunity, but you've also heard today about the things that need to change or need to be worked on together to make that opportunity a reality. So thank you very much and have the best of the rest of the year.
Ar ran Engage for Success Cymru, hoffwn ni ddiolch eto I bawb sydd wedi cyfrannu heddiw yn ogystal â noddwyr. Byddwn ni heb wedi gallu gwneud hyn hebddo chi. On behalf of Engage for Success Wales, may I again thank each of our conversationalists today, as well as our sponsors. We could not have done this without you. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Ni'n gobeithio bych chi gallu fynychu'r sesiynau eraill a hefyd yn edrych ar y cynnwys ar-lein lle mae dewis o erthyglau ar gael. We hope you will tune in to our other sessions and also check out our content online, where we have a selection of articles. Diolch yn fawr iawn, cadwch yn ddiogel ac aroswch yn iach. Thank you, stay safe and stay well.